StrayAllDay.com.
You are now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unified philosophy that's called work on your game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic is why people conform. Before we get into this and me explaining not only why answering the question, but also why that even matters, let me remind you of two things. First of all, my daily motivation, Monday motivation message is guaranteed to have you focused, sharp, and on point to start your day or your week, respectively. All you got to do is be a member of my text community to get that message. And that number to text me at is 305-384-6894. Once I start sending that message out again, you'll be getting it directly to your phone. Secondly, Work on Your Game University. That is a place where you can get access to all of our courses and trainings, all of my tactical and strategic trainings, and get access to me as a coach. That is all at workonyourgameuniversity.com. That's for people who are looking to perform at their highest level, do so consistently, and produce more results in your life and in your business. Again, workonyourgameuniversity.com. With that out the way, let's get into this topic here today, which is why people conform. First of all, let's get a definition of the word conform. It means to comply with rules, standards, or laws. Now, compliance is not always a bad thing. I mean, most of you probably follow the law, otherwise you would probably end up in jail. And there are times when it makes sense to follow the rules and maybe even make your own rules. And we've talked about standards a lot here. And I tell you that the highest level performers out there set their own standards. They don't look at other people's standards. They set standards for themselves. So these things are not necessarily negative things. However, we're not done. Compliance is, again, if nobody ever complied, another thing I want to tell you about compliance is that if no one ever complied, then we would have complete anarchy. You couldn't have a civilized society if nobody complied. Nobody followed any rules, standards, or laws. If everyone just drove through traffic lights, regardless of what color it was, we'd have a lot of trouble. The world that we have today could not exist without these things existing. When it comes to architecture, we have building codes that you can't just build a building however you want. There needs to be certain standards and rules and laws followed when building and building. Otherwise, your skyscrapers and bridges and buildings would all just collapse under the weight of humans going inside of them when that's not supposed to happen. Or if the wind blows too hard, or if there's a rainstorm, that would be a problem. All right, so we probably don't want that to happen. Airplanes would explode, cars would self-combust if we didn't have rules, standards, and laws that at least some of us followed at least some of the time. So compliance is not necessarily negative on the surface. The world we have today, again, couldn't exist without it. So when we talk about science, biology, engineering, many other examples. However, many people do a lot of complying in areas in which compliance is not needed and is not necessary, but often they're doing it unconsciously, not understanding you're complying in ways in which you don't have to, and also ways that are limiting your potential and limiting your opportunities. That's the part that matters. It's not that you don't have to comply and you're doing it. It's not like you should do it just out of sheer perversity. Maybe you should, depending on the type of person you are. But the reason you should take a look at where you're complying and in ways in which it may not be serving you is when you're complying yourself out of your own potential and out of your own opportunities. Then I'm going to explain what those ways are, why they are, and also what you should do about it. Point number one. Today's topic, once again, is why people conform. And actually, I'll say what you can do about it, and what you should do is going to be up to you. But I'll tell you what your options are. Point number one, topic again, why people conform. It's because it's easy to follow the crowd. It's the number one reason why people conform, because following the crowd is easier than doing the alternative. Most people comply because it's easier to just look around and see what everybody else is doing and do the same thing. And there are several reasons why this is easier. One reason is if you were to not comply and go against the grain, then you would have to actually engage your brain and think, and compliance requires no thinking. I just look around, see what everybody else is doing, and just blindly follow it. No thinking required. And you must remember that thinking, folks, is mental exercise. Thinking is mental exercise. You have to make your brain do work if you think. Any of you has ever spent a day doing a whole lot of hard thinking? Maybe you were doing a bunch of reading. Maybe you were figuring some problems out. Maybe you were strategizing. You were coming up with a system. Or maybe you were just in school or in class, or you were doing a whole lot of learning over the course of a day. By the end of the day, your head hurts. Your brain is tired. It is fatigued from all the work that you've been doing. Whereas on the other hand, if you spend a day doing mindless activities, so let's say you watch TV all day, at the end of the day, your brain is not really tired. It may be, let's see, what word would I describe? Maybe in a fog because you haven't been using it to do anything. So it's feeling lazy because you're sitting around doing nothing. But at the same time, it's not tired because it hasn't been doing any work. So thinking is mental exercise. And doing exercise is not always easy, and many people would rather just not do the exercise and instead put their brain on autopilot and let it just do what everybody else is doing. But you also have to remember that anytime you want to excel in any space, first thing you should do is look around and see what everybody else is doing and look to do the opposite of that rather than complying with and copying that. Earl Nightingale emphasized this in his audio called The Strangest Secret. It's all about how do you get to that top 5% of performers in life. And many people don't get to the top 5% simply because they conform and they comply with what they see everybody else doing. And Earl, again, he emphasized this in his audio called The Strangest Secret. If you have not heard that audio, you can access it for free. Just look it up on YouTube or your favorite audio platform like Spotify or Apple Music or Apple Music. And just look up Earl Nightingale and you will see it. It's called The Strangest Secret. It's about 36 minutes in length, which means it's not too long for any of you to consume. And I would suggest you do it even if it was 3 hours. If I'm telling you to consume something here, a book or a audio or something like that, anything that I mentioned here on this show, you need to go get it. Point number 2. Today's topic, once again, is why people conform. Number 2, going against the grain is emotionally painful and you will be attacked for it. That's not even the emotional pain. Let me explain what I mean. Many people don't have the fortitude for going against the grain, the internal fortitude to go against the grain, because there are several things that happen when you make the decision to go against the grain, let alone do you actually follow through on it, let alone do you do it successfully. If you read the story of any person who openly went against the grain, you're going to notice several things when they go against the grain of what others were complying with. Whether you read their book, whether you read a book about them, whether you watch a documentary on them, whether you watch a biopic that is designed around their life or a series or something you can find on Netflix or Amazon Prime, you're going to see many commonalities. The same things happen to all of them. First thing is the establishment will attempt to silence, shame, or condemn that person for the very fact that they're going against the grain. That's the first thing that happens. As soon as you start going against the grain, the first thing that happens is people will come out and try to tell you to be quiet, or they'll indirectly try to quiet you. They will try to shame you for having the opinion or the approach that you have, and they will condemn you and try to turn the group against you if the group isn't already against you because you're doing something that the group does not want you to do. When I came out, for example, many years ago and trashed the Black Lives Matter organization, hashtag, the movement, whatever you want to call it, all of it, I got all of these things happen. People attempted to silence, shame, and condemn me. Well, I got condemned by a bunch of people because they just didn't agree with me. People tried to shame me for being a black person trashing an organization called Black Lives Matter, and nobody could really silence me, but they would if they could. All right, and this happens anytime I come out and speak on any social topic that goes against the grain of what most people have decided to agree with, or what most people expect me to agree with because of who I am, because of my immutable characteristics. Then these are the things that people do. They try to silence you, shame you, and condemn you. And the bigger your voice is, the stronger the pushback against you. So if you want to see an example of this that's more on an even higher scale, look at Donald Trump and how they tried to silence, shame, and condemn him when he first came out in politics. And when he questioned the outcome of the 2020 election, regardless of your opinion of it, when he questioned it, what did they do? The social media platforms literally came together and silenced him. They banned him and blocked him from being able to communicate on all the social media platforms all at the same time. Another example of a person they did this to is Andrew Tate. The exact same thing. They all came together and banned him from all the social media platforms all at the same time. That is the first thing they did. They attempted to silence him. And then, since everybody was talking about it after they did it, next thing is they try to shame and condemn anybody who happened to want to support him. And they just shamed and condemned his name, even though he wasn't around to hear it anymore. They shamed and condemned anything that he was saying and anything that he was about. And what's the main reason that they did this? Is because he was going against the grain. That's the reason that they got together and banned Donald Trump, because he was going against the grain. He was going against the grain of saying, I do not believe in and I don't accept the results of this election that have been announced. And because he was going against the grain so strongly, I don't think him being on social media was going to change anything that ended up happening. They kicked him off social media in the name of quote unquote saving democracy, which is complete nonsense, bullshit. It was a great pretext, but did it do anything? No, I don't think it did. So this is what happens whenever you decide to go against the grain, is that people will silence, shame, and try to condemn you. And this can happen on a larger scale, like I said, mentioned president, or a smaller scale. This could just happen in your community. Imagine if you're strongly connected to a bunch of people in your local community, but then you go against the grain, and all those people you've been connected to, who might be the closest friends you have, they decide they don't want to deal with you anymore. How would that feel? Is that emotionally painful? I would think so. See, this is what I mean. So when you go against the grain, there's a penalty to be paid. And if it doesn't work to silence, shame, and condemn you, the next step is, on a bigger picture, people will try to use a legal system against you, which means taking you to court, whether it's suing you or trying to get you criminally charged. That's the next step. And again, you want to see an example of this, look at Andrew Tate, look at Donald Trump. This is exactly what happens. And if that doesn't work, they try to take your life. Again, look at Donald Trump. This is exactly what happens. A 3-step process. They silence you so you can't communicate with anyone. Then they take you to court. Then they try to kill you. 1, 2, 3. Again, you look at Donald Trump, you'll see this has played out exactly as I just described. And this is what happens when you go against the grain, folks. If you're on a large enough scale, these are the steps that they take. And if step 1 doesn't work, then they go to step 2. Step 2 doesn't work, they go to step 3. This is what is happening with Andrew Tate as well. They silenced him off of social. Then they took him to court. And if he beats all the court cases, then next step is the same thing they try to do to Trump. So this is what happens when you go against the grain. Even though most people never go far enough to face these consequences, many people feel, even without any of that, the emotional pain of simply not being part of the group as a strong enough pull to keep you from going against the grain. The reason many people do not speak out and say what they really think and share their real opinions on certain subjects these days, especially today when everyone has a megaphone and a platform, is because they don't want to deal with the emotional pain of being condemned and talked negatively about by their peer group. That's the reason many people don't say certain things. There are many things that I've said here on this show that there are people out there who completely agree with me and will quietly agree with me, but they would never publicly agree with me because they don't want to deal with the backlash that will come from doing so. And I'm not mad at you for it. I'm just pointing this out. This is one of the reasons that people conform, because they know what happens if they don't conform. And anybody who dares step out of bounds, step outside of those lines and not conform, the example of what gets done to them is a message to everybody else of what's going to happen if you don't stay in line. Speaking of such, since I mentioned Donald Trump, January 6, 2021. What happened there? Donald Trump goes and gives a speech. He tells people to peacefully and calmly, it was another word that he said. He said peacefully, and it was another word that he said, but he clearly said peacefully, you're going to march down to the Capitol, because the Capitol is where the people are basically confirming the election. And these people, Trump supporters, marched down there, and a small percentage of them, even though depending on what videos you saw, it might seem like it was all of them. It wasn't all of them. It was a small percentage of them. They go and fight through barriers, and they're looking to break into the Capitol building. And you saw the videos of what happened in the Capitol building. People are just walking around calmly smiling at each other. For the most part, that's what happened. But that's not even why I'm bringing it up, is that I don't know if all of you know this, but damn near everyone who went to Washington, D.C. to attend the Trump rally that occurred on January 6, 2021, do you know that the authorities, the FBI, went and visited every one of those people? I know of people who went to D.C. on January 6th as a supporter of Donald Trump, just went to the speech that he gave. They did not go into the Capitol building, might not even march down to the building. They were just in D.C. to support Trump on January 6th. The FBI went and showed face to those people. And what was the reason for this? And if you don't know, I don't know how much you all pay attention to this stuff, but a bunch of people who went to D.C. on January 6th have been incarcerated, and many of them with long sentences for nothing more than basically the misdemeanor of entering a building that they weren't supposed to enter, like trespassing, basically, is what many of them got. These not the people who were hitting officers or beating anybody or doing anything like that. And by the way, nobody died on January 6th. The only person who died on January 6th was a woman who was one of the supporters who broke into the building and tried to jump through she was trying to break through a glass window, and one of the security guards shot her, and she was a white woman. The security guard who shot her was black. She was the only person who died on January 6th. None of the security personnel in D.C. died on January 6th, even though depending on who you listen to, they may keep saying that they did. They did not. But anyway, the reason I'm bringing all that up is to say that the charges they got brought against, and let me back up, many people were incarcerated after the January 6th situation, and the FBI went and came and found these people. So basically, they took all the footage, put it out there, asked people, "Can you help us identify these folks?" People went and told on people who they knew. "Oh, that's such and such. That's such and such." FBI went and came and found those people, incarcerated them, and these people got long sentences. I'm talking years sentences for their trespassing on January 6th. And the reason that they got those long sentences is not because they had done something that was so terribly against the law. The reason was it was a message to everybody else. If you go against the grain the way that these people did, we will do the same thing to you. That was the point. It was a message to let everybody else know you better conform or else you're going to get the same thing that they got. This is what happens when you go against the grain. And now these people, it may be hard for them to get jobs, maybe hard for them to re-enter their communities. It's hard on their families. Any of you who's ever had a family member incarcerated, you know how difficult that can be, just the process of them being incarcerated and that person being removed from the family. If that's a head of household, like, what does that do to your family? It does a lot of things. So going against the grain did a lot. There was a lot of backlash for going against the grain in that situation, but this happens on smaller levels as well. You get isolated because it triggers the same areas. You get isolated even on a small scale, being isolated from other peers, being isolated from a group that you used to be a part of, triggers the same pain centers of the human brain. It has been shown that would be triggered if you experience actual physical pain. Like if you drop something on your foot, you feel the same part of the brain gets triggered then that gets triggered when you're isolated from the group. Human beings, we are social creatures. And to be estranged from the group through an action that you did voluntarily, that you did on your own, is something that most people are unwilling to deal with. So being that, if you go against the grain, a bunch of your friends may not want to talk to you anymore. Most people decide that they won't go against the grain because they don't want to lose their friends. Even though going against the grain is what they want to do, the pull of keeping their friends is stronger than the pull of doing the thing that they're thinking about doing. This is the reason why many people conform. So many people never act on radical ideas they may have. And even if they were to do so, their experience of being in the void, which is the space in between when you left the people you used to be around and now being around the people you are around. Talked about this in episode 2733. This keeps people from trying. Or if they even try, they go right back to where they were before because they realize how lonely it is when they're isolated. And most people don't want to deal with that isolation. And this is the reason why many people do the same things that everybody else does, because it feels socially acceptable and they feel all the warm and fuzzies from being around everybody else, even if being around everybody else means you remain average. Point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is why people conform. Number 3, if it were easy to not conform, it wouldn't be what it is. All right, this is a simple human nature point. If it was easy to go against the grain and not conform and look around at what everybody else is doing and do the opposite, like I talk about all the time, if that was easy to do, then we wouldn't even be talking about this. It's not easy to do. This is the reason why so few people do it. Most people do what is easy, expedient, convenient, and normal for them. And normal is just following your own habits. And that's also known as conforming. All of these are forms of conforming. What is easy, expedient, convenient, and normal. As children, we are taught to conform to what our parents say. Then they send us to school for 15 years and we conform to what the teacher said. Then we get jobs for 40 years and we conform to what our bosses tell us to do. Then we retire and maybe you get 5 to maybe 20 years of doing what you want to do, kind of, until however long it is, until you are physically incapable of making your own choices. And now you got to conform again because now somebody's in control of your life because you can't physically control yourself anymore. So how many years of non-conformity do you get if you follow the normal process? Maybe a few. Depending on how your body goes, depending on how long you live, you might get a few until you can't do it anymore. And now somebody else has to control you. You want to see an example of this? Look at, as of this recording, our current president, Joe Biden. All right, right now, he's in a position where he doesn't seem like he's in control of all his faculties. So someone else is in control. All right, you want to know how he stopped being president? That wasn't his call. If you believe that, you believe it was his call to step down when he stepped down, then I got a bridge in Las Vegas to sell you. All right, so then we get back to conforming again until we die. In other words, most people spend their entire lives conforming. To not conform takes thought, physical effort, and the internal fortitude, most importantly, to deal with the stress of being isolated from the crowd. Because as soon as you stop conforming, you are no longer with the group. You are by yourself. And maybe a handful of other people who make the same decision that you make. Most people don't want to deal with that, and therefore most people choose not to. This is the reason why most people simply do what everybody else is doing and what seems comfortable. what seems normal, which is completely fine if that's the way that they want to be. But if you want outstanding results, you got to do outstanding things. It means you got to think in outstanding ways. And outstanding is about standing out. Let's recap today's class, which is why people conform. This means to comply with rules, standards, or laws. Again, compliance is not necessarily a negative thing, but you don't want to comply in every aspect of life if your goal is to be outstanding and to be different from most people. Number one, people conform rather, because it's easy to follow the crowd. Most people do this because it's simply easier to do that than it is to go against what everybody else is doing. One reason is you don't have to think when you are conforming. And another reason is when you are going against the grain and doing something that everybody else is doing, everybody else is not doing, then you find yourself by yourself. Most people don't want to deal with that emotional pain of this. Number two, exactly my point. Going against the grain is emotionally painful and you will be attacked for it. People will attempt to silence you, to condemn you, and just talk down on you and try to shame you simply because you did something that they didn't do, something that they wouldn't do, and maybe even something that they could not do. And many people don't want to deal with that type of backlash. Most people are so afraid of criticism. Napoleon Hill talked about this, and we talked about the 6 basic human fears in Think and Grow Rich. One of them is the fear of criticism, which I believe is the number one fear that people have these days, the fear of being criticized, ridiculed, and attacked by an army of your peers who just have negative things to say about you because you dared step out of bounds. And number three, if it was easy to not conform, then this topic would not even be necessary to be talked about. This is simple human nature. Most people do things that are easy, expedient, convenient, and normal for them. In other words, simply following their habits and the habits of what they see other people doing. As kids, we conform to our parents. We go to school, conform to the teachers, get a job, conform to our bosses. We spend the majority of our lives conforming. And therefore, it is easy to keep conforming because that's the habit that we built. So if you want to do something other than that, it takes a lot of mental and emotional energy and physical energy to go against the grain of your current state of inertia. This is the reason why most people simply just do what's easy. With that said, text me here in my community. My number's down below in the description. Also, down there is a link to workonyourgameuniversity.com. That's the place where you'll like to access all of our courses, all of our trainings, and get direct access to me as your coach. That's where it happens. That's workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre, all